Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Why don't you come up sometime, see me?
Rated bar! Top of the world!
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Hey everybody, Kirk here. I just want to say before we start the episode, make sure you follow us on Twitter.
And Facebook.
And if you enjoy the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and comment on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We love to hear your feedback, and you can find us on any social media by searching Silver Screen Time Machine.
We appreciate your feedback. Look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, and welcome again to Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy and Kirk's classic film review. Hello, Kirk.
Hello, Wendy. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing very well.
And today we are very lucky because we have a guest in the studio, a very important guest, a local Pittsburgh celebrity, I think we could say.
Sure, why not? I'll reluctantly take that phrase.
And it is our friend Sean Collier.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And about 1.2 guests. If you hear a little jingling in the background, my dog Peanut is here with us. Mary Beth and I are going on vacation tomorrow, so he is on his way to my parents' house, so we had to stop on the way. But, you know, he has some film opinions of his own from time to time.
Well, we do appreciate you making the time. If you're about to go on vacation, we really appreciate you.
Oh,
and
sure.
We let you pick our film today. So what we do here is we say we're getting in our time machine and we're going back to when and what are we talking about?
We are going back to 1935. I knew it was 4 or 5. Peanut's jingling so much. Peanut is rooting around the studios here. I thought he would be so well behaved. Going back to 1935 to watch The Bride of Frankenstein.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Now, like Wendy said, Sean, we knew we were going to do a Universal horror movie this week, but we said we'll let Sean pick the movie.
Yep.
Why was it you chose Bride of Frankenstein?
I've watched quite a few of them at this point. I liked them when I was a kid, and then I kind of rediscovered them more recently. And I think it's the best one. I love even the ones that are not so great. And there are some that are a bit more clunkers, particularly some deep sequels and some ancillary properties. But, you know, I really like the original Frankenstein. I really like The Invisible Man. I really like The Mummy. I think pound for pound, kind of element for element, none are quite as strong as The Bride of Frankenstein.
Sure.
Wow, that's a very bold statement. Not even the original Frankenstein.
No, I think those first few, Frankenstein and Dracula especially, they were inventing so much of the visual language for big screen horror. You know, there are earlier horror movies. People will even lump movies like The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Lon Chaney or The Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney. Yeah. People will lump those into the Universal monsters as well. But those are kind of late era silent films. In terms of what horror in the sound era was going to look like, those few kind of established the rules. So I think a few years later, once they really knew what worked, they were able to bring the elements together just a little bit better.
And you mentioned the original Frankenstein, you mentioned The Invisible Man, and you mentioned The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, they all have the same director, right?
Yeah,
James Whale. So you must be a humongous fan of James Whale. And he was a British director, right? He kind of made his niche this sort of horror thing. Do you have any thoughts on him specifically?
I think that he figured out very quickly the way to pace these movies and the right mix of theatricality and horror and frankly comic relief. There isn't a lot in the original Frankenstein, but by The Invisible Man and The Bride of Frankenstein especially, he figured out how to get little moments of humor in there and how to have it be terrifying, certainly for audiences at the time, but also fun as well.
Absolutely. And I think the thing with James Whale is nowadays, with modern movies, franchises are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You know, that's basically most of what we have are franchises. And you hear about those directors who'll maybe do the first movie or the second movie and get burnt out. And I think that's kind of happened with Whale. Like, he did not want to come back and do Bride of Frankenstein. They kind of had to urge him back on. And he insisted that they give him kind of total control. And I think they said that Lemke, the producer, was out of the country while they were filming the movie, which was one of the reasons why he was like, yeah, I'll do this. And there's going to be no one from stopping me to do whatever I want.
Including, I'm sure you'll get into the cast later, but no one wanted to work with Colin Clive again. Colin Clive, who played Dr. Frankenstein. Great actor by that point had a serious drinking problem and kind of kept getting himself hurt, whether that was as a result of his drinking or not. But James Whale wanted him around, felt that he needed to be there, and insisted. And he gives a great performance, limited though he might be.
I feel like James Whale wanted to get as much of the original cast as he could. Of course, he got Boris Karloff, and he tried to get Mae Clark back, but she had suffered from some unspecified illness, and she couldn't play the role. It did say that she was in an automobile accident that kind of messed up her face, maybe around the time of the shooting. I thought it was like 1933, so I don't know if that was part of the reason. But all his original actors were injured. Clive had a broken leg. That's why you see him sitting.
Spends half the movie
He's
in
sitting
bed.
almost the entire time. Boris Karloff, in the middle of production, knocked his hip out of the socket.
Yeah.
I guess it helps with his character, like have him limping around.
But both movies really had a long-term effect on Karloff's physical health.
Right.
He really had long-term damage to his body from everything he had to do with the costume and the shoes and the prosthetics and everything. It really took its toll on him for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and I think he was about 48 when they made this film.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was suffering from arthritis and issues anyway. The interesting thing I wanted to mention about James Whale is he was a British officer in World War I, and he was a prisoner of war.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the Germans took him prisoner of war. And another interesting thing about him is he was openly gay in a time when that was not acceptable in Hollywood, but he was okay. They didn't give him a hard time about it for some reason. So I think that's really great that he was himself. He didn't feel like he had to masquerade as something else. And the thing that I thought was really sad, too, is that he wound up committing suicide in 1957 because he had a couple strokes and he was in a lot of pain. So he drowned himself.
Yeah, he's in very poor health at the end. It's
Yeah.
kind of sad at the end there. But no, he did have a very long career. Like you said, he was not afraid to let everybody know who he was and what he wanted to do.
Yeah, so that's a great thing about him. And like you said, Colin Clive, an alcoholic, he wound up also dying very young, died at 37 of tuberculosis. Maybe, perhaps, that was impacted by his alcoholism.
Sure.
It seems like a lot of the stars of especially this
Yep.
era either lived to be 104
Yeah.
or died young. I think it's a long time before acting became a career where people were really well taken care of,
Sure.
the way they are today. But especially early on, just the physical demands not only took a physical toll, but drove a lot of people to coping with those demands in some negative ways,
Sure.
unfortunately.
So let's talk a little bit about the plot. I thought it was very interesting because it kind of starts off with a flashback to the original Frankenstein, and they're using the original Frankenstein footage.
Previously on Frankenstein.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
case you missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I thought that was pretty cool, using the original footage, and they're kind of flashing back. They believe that he's dead. They think he has perished in a fire.
Well, going back a little further, too, they use that framing device of you start out in a castle and it's actually Mary Shelley telling
right.
the story.
The
They're
prologue.
describing that the scenes you talk about where they're reusing the old footage is they're kind of remember the monster and he did this and this, and they're showing the highlight reel of the original film to kind of get you set up. But I like that because they have Elsa Lancaster.
Yeah. Elsa
yeah,
Lancaster, yep.
Elsa Lancaster playing Mary Shelley.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty cool because it adds like a meta element to it, some thematic bookends to the film. But also, she's a really good actress.
Yes.
And she's got a lot of personality, a lot of charm. And it was good to see her do something besides scream and hiss.
Yeah.
I mean, she's great as the bride, but the bride doesn't have a whole lot to do. So it was great to see her in that other role.
Yeah, and the censors had a lot of problems with this film, and including the prologue. They didn't want the relationship to be apparent between Mary Shelley and the
light throuple going on
Yes,
there.
yes,
Yeah.
you're completely right. And also, they thought her cleavage was too on display in that particular scene.
It's interesting that if you watch them back to back, that Frankenstein is a pre-code movie.
Yeah.
And the production code is in place by the time Bride
That's
of
true,
Frankenstein
yeah.
hits. So it's the first one is a little bit darker, but the second, you can see how they're finding clever ways to play around it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Too. Now, did you like that opening? That's very unusual, especially to have a meta element in a movie from 1935.
Sure.
I think people are just fascinated with this. Frankenstein was written so that Mary Shelley could win a bet over Lord Byron. People are just fascinated by that
Yeah.
factoid and keep finding ways to work it into this story.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I like the opening. Like I said, I like having her there, but I think it's just a really unique way, instead of saying, oh, here's the next part, draw back the curtain curtain and say, everything you saw was this story. Here are the people telling the story. Then zoom back in and resume, where it kind of left off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess what we wind up finding out, of course, is that Frankenstein has not perished in the fire. He is alive and well. Well, maybe not well, but he's alive. And he's back to his murderous ways of just killing local townspeople. And again, the censors, they said, basically, kill as many people as you can, because they knew the censors were going to give them a hard time about. So they figured that if they killed a lot of people, then they could get away with killing a smaller amount. And that's how they kind of got around that. I think it said they originally killed 21 people. And they said, that's way too many. That's way too many. So they went down to, I think, 11 or something, something much smaller.
Yeah, reasonable total.
Yes.
And the look of the monster, I think we should about here, when you first see him.
The makeup, yeah.
The makeup's very different. At the end of the first movie, he's burned. In the fire. So his makeup has that effect to it. And also, because he had to speak in the original film, Karloff has a plate in his mouth.
Yeah, a dental plate.
Dental work that he was able to take out, and it resulted in the sunken look, the sunken cheeks you see in the original movie. Because he had to talk in this one, he couldn't do that, so he has a little bit fuller face. But it's also a little more off-putting somehow. I think it's because of that burned out look, but also he just looks more weathered, and I think a little more evil, to reflect kind of where the story goes.
Yeah, and the makeup artist is Jack Pierce for this particular film. And yeah, he did specifically alter his appearance to make it look like he had been in a fire. And over the course of the film, he would reduce the makeup so it would look like it was healing too. Sure. So that was a really good job he did. And he also created the bride's hair, that iconic, what would you even call that hairstyle? Nefertiti. He based it off of Nefertiti, they say.
Okay.
So that a Nefertiti hairstyle, he also created that as well.
And it was a heavy wire cage.
Yep.
Getting back to the demands that these actors, she was wearing, not like a little plastic thing. She was wearing a thick nest of wire on her head. And actually, for those scenes, had her eyes taped open to have that popped, never blinking stare.
And she also was wrapped in tightly in bandages. Right. She couldn't even go to the bathroom or anything. She said she would try not to drink liquids because it was just too much of a hassle to go to the bathroom, and I'm sure it wasn't very comfortable.
And speaking of her hair, I don't know if too many people know this, but the bride is actually a redhead. You don't see it in the film, but she is the wig it's red and white stripes.
Did not know that.
So we go back to the story a little bit, and there's a character, Minnie, and she's kind of the alarmist. She's like, the monster, and she's real annoying and shrill.
I love her. Una O'Connor.
Una O'Connor.
And played almost the same role in The Invisible Man.
Yeah.
And she's in a lot of movies. I always think of her from Witness to the Prosecution, like that lady, the witness that can't see and can't hear. Yeah, she can't see or can't hear, whichever it is. I can't remember now.
Yeah, she's definitely the comic relief that Sean talked about.
Right.
Her first appearance is a little off-putting because the monster comes out from the remains of the tower he was in at the first movie. And the parents, if you recall in the first film, Frankenstein accidentally drowns a little girl.
Right.
And
the parents,
Yeah, and the parents come, they want to see the body. That's how they get their closure. They want to see the body. So Frankenstein comes up out of the water, kills these two people. So now he's murdered this entire family, and immediately you get Una O'Connor and her screaming, her doing her routine. So
and the monster kind of staring at her like, well, she's weird. Anyway, have other things to do.
But yeah, it's just a little bit of a shock there where you're like, oh my God, this whole family's dead. And then you have her doing her little bit. So little total issue there at the beginning, but throughout the whole movie, I think she's great.
But isn't she even in the prologue, though? Isn't she the servant in the prologue?
She has a quick walk on. She's the servant
I thought she
or
was
maid
in
or something.
She transitioned from the prologue into the actual film as well. So that was really interesting, I thought. What eventually happens is that the monster is wreaking all this havoc. We see Henry at his house sitting down, as usual, with his fiancée Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth is now played by Valerie Hobson, who was a British actress. She was in Great Expectations.
And was 17 at the time of filming.
19, I thought it was. Was it 17?
I learned that she was 17, thus allowing them to pay her much less.
Oh, wow.
I defer to your knowledge on the matter, because I'm not sure. But yes.
She got a underage scale, unfortunately, for a big role, which is a bit of a shame, but she gives a good performance.
Yeah, she does. And they're supposed to be getting married, and then suddenly this alarm is raised. This monster's around, and all the townspeople are on alert, and he's kind of just walking around, and he winds up up going to all these random places. He winds up going to see this fellow, this blind man, and he spends a lot of time with this blind man because he doesn't know he's a monster, obviously, because he's blind. And that's who teaches him to talk. So he's learning to talk. He teaches him the wine. He teaches him the bread. Now, Sean, there's a lot of Catholic or Christianity symbolism in this that I thought we would talk about because I think it's very interesting.
And that scene is where they literally put a spotlight on it. The old man says something about friendship and God has sent him a companion.
Yes.
And it fades except for the crucifix on the wall. There's the kind of a pop out to the crucifix on the wall. The one that jumped out to me in addition to that is later on the monster's on the run and is kind of framed opposite this giant crucifix in a graveyard and actually goes directly underneath it to hide. I've been thinking about that a lot, and the closest thing to an explanation, because there's 3 or 4 other examples you can pick, is something that the monster has to die for Dr. Frankenstein's sins.
Yes.
We're not literally into Frankenstein as Jesus. You can listen to Rob Zombie's song Jesus Frankenstein if you want that. But there does seem to be this, the last thing he says is we belong dead, that it just somehow fated that he also needs to be sacrificed.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like they are in a way symbolizing the monster, metaphorically putting him in the Jesus Christ role. Think about what they're eating and drinking. Bread good.
And
wine good. When he's picked up on those logs, it looks just like a crucifixion. And I thought was really interesting. I was wondering why they kept repeating the doctor's name. We haven't spoken about him yet, but why did it keep repeating Dr. Pretorius so much? I kept thinking, why do they keep saying his name? Una, she says it several times when she's introducing him. It's said a lot during the film. And I read that there was a term called praetor. It was a Roman magistrate back in the day. And that was a term for a Roman magistrate, praetor, a title by the government of ancient Rome to a man acting in official capacity. So I didn't know if that also sort of went with the magistrate that condemned Jesus to death. His name is Pretorius. Also, you notice he's always wearing what looks like a Roman Catholic collar all the time. So I think there's just so much symbolism in this film about, and I almost wonder too, were they doing some of this to get at Joseph Breen? Because he was a big Catholic guy. Like, were they kind of mocking him?
Well, the other thing that they could have been playing with is they got a lot of heat in the first movie for Dr. Frankenstein saying, I know what it is to be God.
Yeah.
And for decades, you couldn't hear him say that line. Every early VHS release, and especially the syndicated
They thunderclapped
releases,
it.
They covered that up and took a lot of heat for that. So I wonder if there isn't a little bit of, oh, you don't like when we play with religion. Well, now we're going to do it in a way that completely falls under the bounds of the Hays Code.
Sure.
You didn't like when we were explicit. Well, now we're going to imply it and make it even stronger.
Absolutely.
With that, I put my playwriting hat on and I think maybe they're just saying Dr. Pretorius all the time to differentiate from Dr. Frankenstein so that we know which doctor is being referred to. But no, I think that there's something to that name as well. It feels like prehistoric too. It just feels like there's something Promethean about this guy, who's a great villain.
And it just sounds cool. It's a cool sounding name.
Pretorius.
Yeah,
Well, let's talk about Dr. Pretorius, actually. They originally wanted Claude Rains for this role.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to imagine, but they have this fellow, Ernest Theisinger. This fellow...
A British theater actor.
Yeah, this fellow actually was also fought in World War I and was injured in the trenches. And what he would do was, when he was injured, he picked up sewing, which was not considered very manly. This guy was bisexual. He was kind of a campy guy. But he created this whole sewing kit thing for disabled British soldiers, and they could do this to raise their morale and give them something to do. Huh. And it was like this big nonprofit sort of thing that he created, which I thought was really interesting. And he was of noble birth. His father was a lord. Just some background information on this fellow.
And so much different from Dr. Frankenstein.
Yes.
Henry in the first film is the mad scientist, is obsessed with discovering the secrets that probably in his mind are going to benefit mankind somehow. Pretorius kind of just wants to see how weird and chaotic it can get.
He's kind of the foil for Frankenstein. He's what Frankenstein could become.
Right.
If he kept down that path.
Right. And clearly has no sympathy for his creations, as we see with his little bell jar.
I definitely want to talk about that. I thought that was the most interesting thing in the entire film. That was amazing how they did that. I was really impressed with that.
Those effects, again, in 1935, the first few times I saw it, I wondered, how do you do this? It's just painstaking frame-by-frame matting.
Yeah.
Long shots of regular-sized people put small onto another frame.
And they just had giant bell jars that they put these people in. in, and they filmed that, and they just, like you said, matted it right on. So yeah, I love watching camera effects from those times just because they had so little to work with that you know the amount of ingenuity that went to create something like that.
Well, the fellow that did that, let's give him the credit. His name was John P. Fulton. He's the one that created the special effects. He was the head of the special effects department in Universal Studios. So yeah, like you said, they shot them in the full-size jars against black velvet and aligned them with the perspective onset jars, and then they just matted it into the rear plate. So,
And
but
it looks really
looks
good. It's really
very,
seamless.
it looks very real. It's very, very impressive.
Yeah.
Especially the mermaid. I mean, the king and the queen are great, but they go to a mermaid swimming in this
In the water, yeah.
tiny tank. Who was, I don't have her name, but she was an Olympian. She was
Olympic swimmer, yeah.
Yeah.
I loved that part. That was maybe my favorite part in
And
the
you
film.
use the term campy.
Yes.
I mean, this scene is so silly. What it is, for those who haven't seen the film, Dr. Praetorius comes and he wants to kind of swap secrets with Frankenstein. He knows Frankenstein's created this monster. He wants those secrets. He wants to be able to do it. And he says, oh, let me show you what I've done so far. And he brings out these boxes, he brings out these jars, and he has little miniature people that he's created. And he makes them dance and he makes them put on a little show. And it is, for a character who's so dark and who's so evil, it's a very silly, campy little scene.
And arguably more impressive than what he's trying to do in the rest of the movie.
Absolutely,
Like,
yeah.
You made 8 people that can apparently talk and express themselves
Yeah.
and get dressed, and this is your meal ticket. Go
Yeah.
with the little bell jar people, Pretorius.
Yeah, so he does come and he's trying to convince Dr. Frankenstein to help him create a woman to be the mate of Frankenstein's monster, Boris Karloff's character. And he doesn't want to. He's like, no, leave me alone. I don't want to be part of this. He wanted to go get married to Elizabeth, and he sort of threatens him and bullies him into doing it. And I thought it was really interesting. As a matter of fact, the laboratory scene, maybe this is getting a little bit ahead, but the laboratory scene when they're making the bride, very reminiscent of Metropolis, very reminiscent of the robot creating scene. And it said that they took inspiration off of that, actually. But I see a lot of similarities with that.
I think, too, Wendy, before going further, you're talking about the motivation of creating the bride. That goes back to the novel. In the original novel, this second film is kind of a subplot in the only novel, the first book. And the creature in the novel is much more intelligent, much more sinister, and that's I think I'm in the minority where I kind of like the first movie better because I like that pure innocence that the monster has. And you see him take on some of those qualities here. In the book, he forces Frankenstein to make him his bride. In this one, they still wanted to make the monster somewhat innocent, somewhat misunderstood. A lot of the qualities you see in Praetorius were actually transferred from the monster character in the novel. They put that onto him so the monster could maintain that kind of more human, likable traits that he has.
Yeah, and honestly, Boris Karloff does a great job of making the monster. You don't hate the monster.
No.
You actually feel sorry for the monster, but yeah, Pretorius you do hate. There's nothing redeeming about him. He's despicable. You can't stand him.
Yeah.
They did kind of spin off the unlikable qualities of the monster and made Pretorius out
Exactly,
of it. And that's interesting. I mean, there's some sympathy for Frankenstein in the first movie.
Yeah.
But nowhere near the level that you would have here.
No.
And in a lot of the sequels, he becomes kind of the helpless muscle.
Yeah.
In a very rudimentary way, they must have identified people love this monster and want to kind of root for him a little bit.
Yeah, even if you see later iterations, uses of the monster, anytime they bring in the Frankenstein's monster, he's always kind of a good guy. But he's either purely good or he's misunderstood or he's confused, like he is in the first movie. You never see him really evil or like antagonistic towards somebody.
Well, and I think the scene where he spends all that time with the blind man really makes him seem good.
Yeah.
He wants to be friends with the blind man. He tries to protect him when the hunters come in,
Yeah.
which one of the hunters, early role of John Carradine.
Oh, really?
Yes, he's one of the hunters that comes in and says, hey, what are you doing with this monster here? Don't you know he's a monster? What are you doing? Yeah, so, but I also want to talk a little bit about the cinematography. John Mescal? I feel like it's like, that's the tequila. Mescal.
It's not John Mescal. No.
It's not tequila. Mescal. But again, here's another fellow that's like a very severe alcoholic. They actually have to go get a car and bring him to the set every day or else he's not going to show up. But he did some really beautiful work here. They use a term called Rembrandt lighting. I'm not even 100% sure what that means, but it's a very Gothic kind of looking lighting. You have your painted sets like the sky. He shot at different angles, which was not something, again, we talked about this just a couple episodes ago when we talked about Citizen Kane, about how pioneering that is. Well, they were doing it here in 1935.
Sure.
He was shooting from different angles, and he would use the low angle on the monster to make him look huge, and he'd use high angles on Pretorius to really make his forehead shine and look kind of awful and evil. And they also said they used a blue filter on the monster to kind of give him, I guess, an eerie glow or something. But I was really impressed with the way he shot the film. I thought it was very Gothic and foreboding and gives you that sense of, ugh.
Was he the cinematographer on the first movie?
I do not know that answer.
I'll tell you in a minute.
We have to go to the miracle of Google.
Because I feel like it's been a while since I've watched the original, but I feel like they look very similar, and I feel like a lot of those same techniques, probably like you said, Sean, improved over the years, but it does have that same kind of Gothic expressionistic feel to it.
No, different cinematographer, Arthur Edson on the first one.
Okay.
A shout out, as I did this past weekend, just as we're recording this, not 48 hours ago, I hosted a double feature of The Wolfman and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
Oh, nice.
At the Harris Theater downtown, which was great. But a lot of my information for tonight and then was from this book, The Monster Movies of Universal Studios by James L. Neibauer, Neibaur. And if you have an interest in this, I recommend it. You can get it on your Kindle for like $3. And it has a chapter on every mainline Frankenstein, Dracula,
cool.
Invisible Man. Yeah, a ton of great information. But the thing that jumped out to me about Mescal's cinematography is it felt much more in the world, in the real world, than the original does. There are, especially towards the end of the original, not only is it clear we're on a soundstage, you can actually see like the ripples in the curtains that are hanging behind them. There's none of that here, and it really feels like that Gothic old universal horror world and not at all like a play. The 1931 Dracula and Frankenstein can occasionally feel like a filmed play a little bit. And I think that partially with, maybe better and bigger sets and the development of the Universal backlot over that time, but also through Mescal's cinematography, they really got more of a sense of place, I think, with The Bride.
I don't know if you know this about us, Sean, but we don't like to do spoilers on this show, just in case any of our listeners have not seen the film. We don't want to ruin it for them, so we will not tell the end, although I think the end is very good.
I said the monster's final line in the film, but
that's okay.
That didn't imply what happened to him.
Yeah.
Right.
It just gave a window into his state of mind.
Right. And we can always cut that. No.
Yeah.
Just kidding. We won't do that. Kirk, do you have anything else you want to mention about this film?
No, I think we covered everything.
For people that are just listening and not actually seeing, Kirk has on a Frankenstein shirt, so he goes very well with today's theme. Sean, anything you want to mention?
I saved my Frankenstein shirt for tomorrow because we are going down to Universal for Halloween Horror Nights.
That's where I got this.
Fun.
Oh yeah, great. I might come back with another one.
Nice.
I loved seeing Dwight Fry in this. Dwight Fry was, if you look past Bela Lugosi, which is hard to do, is the highlight of Dracula as Renfield, coming back in a very similar role, which was a lot of fun. And my fun facts drawn from, the fun fact I got from Svengoolie. I'm a big Svengoolie fan, the horror host in Chicago. The score for this was so dramatic and so appropriate that they kept reusing it again and again, most notably for Flash Gordon serials. The Flash Gordon serials have the Bride of Frankenstein score. And I forgot where I found this, but right after the hut burns down, the monster kind of walks away and comes across a pack of schoolgirls who are going somewhere.
Yeah.
And one of them yells, "Look!" and they all scream. The one that yelled, "Look!" was the actress that played Maria in the first movie.
Okay.
So it's about 3 years later. No one's going to think, I've seen her before.
Sure.
They just wanted to bring her back, and James Whale made sure she had that one-word line, "Look," so she would be paid as a performer and not as an extra. So
awesome.
Look for her
the
next time you watch Bride of Frankenstein.
And in that scene also, there's another Jesus Christ figurine.
I think I wrote down 5 of them.
You're probably right. I just remember in that scene, I remember seeing it specifically as well and thought, wow, there's just like a lot of these symbols all over the place here. Obviously trying to get at something. I'm glad you mentioned the score because I did think it was very good. I thought it was very dramatic and it worked really well with the film.
Franz Waxman.
Waxman, yes. Yeah.
And the original movie, I think, was just all public domain classical music, right? Like there was no original score for the original. So that's something else that they kind of improved on from the original. original.
Yeah, the score is great. The cinematography is great. We here at Silver Screen Time Machine like to do star ratings, the highest being 5, the lowest being, I guess, 0, but I don't think anything is 0. But we will start with you since you're our guest.
I would love to go all the way to 5. I think that there are some slow stretches, a little bit, but a 4.5 leaning upward, let's say.
That's fair.
All right, Kirk, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I really like this movie. It's not my favorite Universal. Like I said, I prefer the original Frankenstein a little bit more, so I won't go 5 on it, but I will go to a very solid 4.
Okay, and
You're less of a
this
horror
is not
fan,
my
right?
genre.
Right.
This is not my genre. I'm really big into cinematography, so I do like that about this film. I'm particular about acting, and I'm not really a big fan of the melodramatic acting in this film. It kind of grates on me a little bit. I thought Boris Karloff was excellent. I thought Pretorius, the guy that played Pretorius, was really good. But Henry Frankenstein, he's so melodramatic. Sometimes he just drives me crazy. So unfortunately, I will give this a 3.5. So my apologies.
That's
but
still respectable.
Yeah, it's a good film. I was really impressed with the score. I was really impressed with the cinematography. Definitely a very watchable film, something I think anybody could enjoy.
Definitely.
Not terrifying. You can show children without them being completely terrified, I think.
Sure. It's, 80 minutes? It's a short film. So
Less than that.
Yeah.
And a fun double feature with Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It's the man in the hut is very
Yeah.
neatly parodied in Young
I think
Frankenstein.
they use some of the same sets and some of the same...
The lab set,
a lot
was
of,
from the Bride
a lot
of
of same
Frankenstein.
props, yeah.
You are the king of the double features.
I do love double features. May I plug a double feature there?
I was
Absolutely.
going to say, actually, Sean, you tell us a little bit about what you're up to, where we can find you, what's
Sure.
going on in your life.
Well, with the double features specifically, and this being spooky season, I have one more event at the Harris Theater, a little more modern and a little more adult for a Hammer horror double feature.
Nice.
On Sunday, October 29th, we'll do Horror of Dracula, which was their first big swing. That was just called Dracula in the UK. That was Christopher Lee's first turn as Dracula for Hammer. And the very unusual Vampire Circus, which is just as it sounds, and a lot of fun. That is not, unlike Bride of Frankenstein, that is not a double feature to bring the whole family to, but a lot of fun. I love those as well for much different reasons, but another passion of mine is Hammer horror. Since you're listening to a podcast, you must be the sort of person who listens to podcasts. So look for The Number One Movie in America. That's my podcast with Robin Hitchcock and Camila Adams. We hit a different number one movie at random each week. So each week we draw a different number one movie from the past. From, I think we're back to the mid-50s is the earliest information we have, all the way to today. So we just did an episode on Carrie and Moonraker before that. So it really can be anything. But yeah, listen to The Number One Movie in America, anywhere you get your podcasts. And to find out what else I'm doing, just follow me on social at Sean Collier at Sean Collier PGH, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I follow you on Instagram, and you're always doing things. So
Yes,
get a lot of good information about Sean.
Very, very busy, and Vigilance Theater Group, Vigilance Theater on Instagram is my theater company, and we've got a cabaret coming up, and then a little later in 2024, our next original show that I'm working on, which will have a werewolf in it. That's all I can say for now because I haven't written it yet, but there will be a werewolf.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on, Sean. I appreciate you. Thank you for choosing our movie.
Oh,
It was
sure.
great
Thank you
talking
for
to about
watching it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's always good to talk with you, Sean. You're such a great old movie fan. We really appreciate the support from you. And for Sean Collier and me and Kirk, we want to say for Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy and Kirk's Classic Film Review, goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to Silver Screen Time Machine.
Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a comment and a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Intro music composed by Heidi Engel.
Outro music composed by Maximus Monk.
Artwork by Tyler Birch.
Produced and edited by Wendy Wittick and Kirk Kowalkowski.
Recorded at PCTV Studios in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.